Hello, my name is Leticia Francis. Today I'm going to share my story of survival mode and how I managed to climb my way out of it. I grew up in a small island of Bermuda in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and life at the beginning was a-okay until my parents both remarried. And at 7, I was told that my birth was the reason for my parents' divorce. That was incredibly heavy to process at that time. My daddy didn't have time for me. My mama didn't have time for me. And as a result, by the time I was 12, I was looking for attention. I was looking for the love that I didn't get at home. And that came as attention from older men. In Bermuda, it's very common for men in their 20s to prey on teenagers. And I was built like a brick house. If you looked at me at that age, you probably thought I was 22. And it made it very easy for me to meet guys because they would approach me on the street. I would exchange numbers. And I would get to know these people emotionally and physically. I lost my virginity at the age of 12 to someone that was 10 years older than me. So as a teenager, I was very rebellious. And in that time, I met a man that was 28 and I was 14. He was my knight in shining armor. He showed up and he gave me a space to be myself. He had a place that I can go after school. He had a place that I can go weekends. And I would spend a lot of time with him. Because I'm spending a lot of time with him, I'm allowing myself to be vulnerable. And I'm opening up to what is going on in my house. And I thought that was a safe space for me. I didn't realize that I actually armed him with ammunition against me. When I was 15, I got in an argument with my mother's husband. And during that argument, I said I should just kill myself. And my mother's husband laughed in my face. He called my mother into the kitchen. He called my younger siblings into the kitchen. And he told them she wants to kill herself. Let's watch. I was literally mocked at one of my lowest points at that point. And my mom sat in the kitchen and just watched me take a handful of pain medication. I was taken to the hospital. I was pumped full of charcoal and I was admitted for psychiatric watch. And during that time, we had conversations with psychiatrists and family therapists. Everybody wanted to know what was going on. This was my opportunity to speak up. I had gotten shipped to my father's house and my daddy told me I could no longer stay there because his wife didn't want anything to do with me. And I'm living under a roof with a man who thought it was funny for me to kill myself. Having those conversations with my parents, people didn't want to take ownership for what was going on. I was 15. I was the one that needed to be helped, but I was labeled. And as a result, that pushed me further into the arms of this guy who I thought safe. However, I found out quite quickly that he wasn't a safe person. And I remember the very first time that he put his hands on me, it was an absolute shock. I'm still in high school. I have friends that are in high school, male friends. And he saw me talking to someone and did not appreciate it. So one afternoon when I had finished school, I went to his house and I was attacked from behind. He choked me. He threw me to the ground and he started kneeling on my neck, calling me up, telling me that no one will ever love me the way that he loves me. And I'm unlovable in essence because not even my parents care enough about me. I knew then that that wasn't a relationship that I wanted to be in. Like I grew up knowing that a man should never put his hands on a woman. And luckily, there was someone in his household that pulled him off of me that night. And I remember I had a lot of stuff at his house. I packed up everything in a black trash bag. And I left because I knew that this was abusive. And he was able to weasel his way back in by telling me everything that I needed to hear. He was sorry. It would never happen again. And because I was young and ignorant, I had no clue that I was entering into an endless cycle. So I went back because I needed to be out of my mother's house. I needed a space for myself. I knew that I shouldn't have been there, but this was the lesser of two evils for me. So Years went by. I graduated high school. I went off to college for a brief period of time and I dropped out because I was manipulated by this man. He told me that if I left and went to college, I was in Connecticut. It was no way that I could love him. And if I truly loved him, I would come back and I would be his wife. I believed everything because he had groomed me into what he wanted me to be. So I dropped out of university. I went back to Bermuda and I married this man. I found a job in law enforcement shortly after we got married. And I think being in law enforcement or having my own money, because he pretty much gave me everything that I wanted at that point. When I would get in a fight and he got physical, he would buy me Louis Vuitton, he would take me on trips. Like, he did everything to keep me in this shell. But once I started working in law enforcement, now I'm rubbing shoulders with police. I think it was very threatening for him. Not only that I had a sense of independence, working in that environment, I used to work 70 plus hours a week. So that meant I was never home. That gave me the space that I needed away from him. But I think it created a much more dangerous dynamic for me. He knew how much I valued the opinions of others, which meant I wasn't going to tell anybody what was going on in my house. And when I talk about abuse, I'm talking about, I'll get into a fight with him. At the time, I had dreadlocks. He would try to pull my dreadlocks out of my head. He used to rip the acrylic off of my nails. He used to keep me awake for days at a time. And it was consistent. There was sexual abuse, a lot of physical abuse, and the emotional toll that took on me made me feel very small. But there was always a part of me that knew that eventually I would leave. And I started putting an action plan in place. I wanted to go back to college. I knew that if I applied to colleges, it would create a problem for me. But my plan was to apply to universities, colleges, tell him I applied elsewhere, then I actually accept. And then my exit plan was to go off to college and just disappear. In that time of me trying to put things into place, I met a few men. And it wasn't sexual relations, but again, I'm running away from the contention that's in my household. I just wanted someone to see me for who I was. And that came through the attention of men that weren't my husband. I never had sex with him. It was just a text exchange. But those texts actually almost killed me. So one day I had gone to work and I couldn't find myself in. I was terrified that I had left it at home. When I got home after my shift, my husband wasn't home and I decided, let me try to call myself in one more time. And I called myself in and my husband answered. He was belligerent, drunk. And as soon as he answered, my stomach dropped because I knew that he had probably gone through my phone. So he says, yeah, I have your phone and I will deal with you when I get home. And he ended the conversation. So I'm sitting at home on the couch, terrified of what's going to come through the door. And one of my friends called me landline. Now, what was interesting is because most of my friends saw that I had been in a relationship. At this point, I had been with this man for 8 years. And they thought that I was the poster child for good relationships. I was hiding everything that I was going through because I was so ashamed. At this day, my friend calls and she says, listen, I need some relationship advice. She was in a relationship with a addict who was abusing her. And I, in an effort to encourage her, I picked up a book by Young Van Zant called Until Today, which is a daily devotional. And I randomly opened the book. The passage that I read to my friend that night was talking about how people are in our lives for either a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And oftentimes we find ourselves struggling in interpersonal relationships because the person that we are in the relationship with was only meant to be there for a reason or a season, and their time had expired. And I sat with that passage and I felt like I was preaching to myself. Like, wow, this is like the biggest aha moment that I had my entire life. The reason why I'm going through all of this trauma in this relationship is because I'm not meant to be with him. Maybe his role was to get me out of my mama's house for a short period of time. but I definitely was not meant to be with him 8 years later. And I remember hanging up the phone from my friend and just sitting and just thinking, you gotta get out of this situation. Well, he came home very drunk that night, and as soon as he walked through the door, he asked me, was I these guys? And I was like, I'm just talking to him. In the chaos of him shouting and being highly belligerent, I did not realize that he had a knife in his hand. He started stumbling towards me, and all I could do was run to the landline and call my mama. And I called my mama and I said, Mama, I need you to come pick me up right now. He came behind me and ripped the landline out of the wall. I didn't know if she heard me. All I knew was what was about to happen was going to be the worst experience that I had. At the time, we were living with a friend of his, so I ran into the bedroom that I shared with my husband. He followed behind me, and there were 2 exits to this room, both of which he barricaded. He told me the only way that I was leaving there tonight was in a body bag. And in that moment, it was like I was in an out-of-body experience. I saw myself fighting for my life. I never knew that he stabbed me. All I knew is I had to get out of that room. And miraculously, his friend came home during that time and heard the chaos and managed to unbarricade one of the doors, giving me enough time to run out of the room. I ran out of the room, I fell onto the couch. My husband at the time followed me and he straddled me as I was on the couch, trying to stab me. And I always say it was like a Matrix moment. Time slowed down. Like it was like I was dodging bullets. But he never hit me while I was on the couch. His friend, however, was like, listen, you gotta go because I don't want the police here. So I was kicked out of the house. I was forced out of the house by his friend. And I really didn't know what to do. So at this point, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't have shoes on. I don't have a bra on. I'm standing in the rain and the yard is incredibly muddy. So I'm sitting there like, I don't even know what to do. Luckily, my mom followed instructions. And within a few minutes of me being pushed out of the house, my mom drives into the yard. And I instantly felt a sense of calm. But then I felt this warmness, which I couldn't quite understand what it was. My mom opened her door and she said, oh my God, you're bleeding. What happened? In that moment, I think it's when it registered that I had actually been stabbed. I hadn't felt any pain, and that heat, that warmness that I was feeling was actually my blood trickling down my body. When the car pulled up, my husband realized, wait a minute, someone's come to help her. And he started throwing all of my stuff out the windows. My uniform, footwork, my clothes, my shoes, everything that I owned ended up in the mud. But in the chaos, I think he then realized that he threw my Louis Vuitton bags out the window. At this point, that collection was worth well over $20,000. He came outside with the knife to get the Louis Vuitton bags back from me. And in my state of mind, those are my bags. I earned them at this point. You know what I mean? I didn't value my life, but I valued those bags in that moment. And I fought that man for the bags. My mom was in the car screaming, let him have it. Just leave. We gotta go. And I think hearing the fear in her voice, I think kind of snapped me back to reality. Like, he could kill me. He could literally slit my throat right now. So I gave her the bags and I got in the car. My mom's first reaction was to go to the hospital. And I was like, how? No, we are not going to the hospital. Because if I go down there, they're going to call the police. I don't want the police knowing what has happened to me. I work alongside the police. I know that they are just as human as everybody else. And I know that my business would have been spread around Bermuda. I didn't have confidence in the police. So I went to my mom's house and we managed to stop the blood. I called my doctor because for years I have been documenting my injuries. So my doctor knew I was being abused. That's the only person that needed to know. He would take notes of all of my injuries, dates and times, and my narrative of what happened, because I knew if I ever died, at least I had a trail of evidence against him. So I thought I was going to go sleep at my mom's house. She told me, I don't know what you're going to do, but you absolutely cannot stay here tonight. This was the second time my mom had kicked me out of her house. The first time came with a letter from the lawyer saying that if I returned to her property, I would be arrested. But I thought I just got stabbed. This is the lowest points of my life. And if anybody's going to help me, it will be my mom. So I was told to call a women's resource center and see what type of help they could provide, which I did. It turned out I had to be taken to a police station, and then I was escorted to a women's shelter where I resided for the next 2 months. In that time, I thought, you know what? Life is gonna get better. I'm gonna leave. And all of a sudden, all of my problems are gonna disappear. That's not what happened. I eventually got a divorce, but I am now an adult who has never had to contend with who I am. I didn't know who I was up until that point because I had always been defined by my relationships to other people. Like if I was going to describe myself to you, I would say, you know what, I'm so-and-so's daughter or I'm so-and-so's wife. Who was I now that I was divorced at 22? I didn't know. And as a result of not knowing, I hid from myself. And what that looked like was finding peace at the bottom of the bottle. I drank so much that it became a running joke at my job that I was the drunk. I would literally go work straight from the bar and eat Altoids to hide the alcohol until my hangover kicked in 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then there was one day that I had drank. I sat at a bar and drank an entire bottle of by myself. And it was this moment of, why am I doing this? I don't even like how it tastes. But I knew that if I didn't get help in some way, that my life is just gonna spiral out of control. Did I get help right away? No. But I decided, you know what, this is my opportunity to go back to school. So I left Bermuda and I moved to Atlanta and I went back to university. And I thought that, I removed myself from this toxic environment, everything's just gonna fall into place. But the reason why I was in that relationship was because I wanted attention. I didn't know how to give that attention to myself. So the first guy that showed me attention on the streets of an ATL became my man. 6 weeks later, I moved in with him and I found out that he was a addict. I had no idea the devastating effects of drugs and addiction. I was naive to that. My life with him was an absolute nightmare. I found myself in another toxic situation. I stayed with him because I had told everybody he was such an amazing guy. He was so different to my husband, but that was me trying to keep up appearances. I didn't love myself enough to leave. That relationship ended when I met his wife. Now, I had been living with this man for 3 years. I had gone back to Bermuda for the summer to work, to pay for the apartment that we lived in and pay for the bills. And I thought I'll surprise him for my birthday. And I walked into the apartment that I had paid for the next 6 months and found him with a woman who made it clear to me that she had been around for a very long time. So here I am, having to pick up the pieces again. This time I wanted to do it differently. Like, I know that I'm going to work on myself. I graduated from university in Atlanta. I moved back to Bermuda. And I have a good job. I have a good career path. I am working my ass off to make things work for me. But then I meet this guy. And he presented very different than anybody else that I had seen. He was loving. He was caring. Seemed like he actually wanted to see us grow together. The first year of our relationship, bliss. Stuff that movies are made out of. I was happy. And then a family member of his died. And he relapsed. I knew as soon as he started using again because of the relationship that I had just left. I knew the signs and I confronted him. I told him I can't do this again. I absolutely cannot be with somebody that's using drugs. He cried, he begged me to give him one more chance. And I did. In that time, I learned that he was doing a lot behind my back. And one day he called me to tell me that he decided that he was going to go get some help. Could I go to his job and pick up a bag for him? I didn't think anything of it. I went to his job. I picked up the bag. And as soon as I walked out the door, I was surrounded by security. What's going on? Can we look in the bag? Why? We need to look in the bag. So they opened up the bag. And there was steaks and lamb legs and prime rib in this bag. My boyfriend had been stealing from his job. He worked at a very high-end restaurant. He had been stealing from his job for months. So much so that they had installed a camera in the freezer. They knew he was taking it. They just hadn't figured out how he was getting it out of the building. And that day, I showed them. So they called the police and he was arrested. And I thought, okay, life is gonna go back to normal. A couple weeks later, I got a call on my job from the reception. Leticia, the police are here to see you. Here to see me? So I was like, well, can you tell them to meet me in the reception downstairs? So I went downstairs and I was promptly placed under arrest. So I was taken to the police station. I'm processed. I get my one call. I called my mama. It's like, Mama, I'm at the police station. I'm here because of what my boyfriend did a couple weeks ago. I need a lawyer. She said, okay. So I go back in my cell. A couple hours later, one of the sergeants comes to me and says, someone's here to see you. And we usually don't allow visitors. I knew instantly it was my mama. And I knew how my mama was able to pull strings because I had a cousin that was very high up in the police. So I go into this room. I'm seated behind plexiglass. I pick up a phone to speak to my mama. And the first thing she says to me is, why do you love everybody else more than you love yourself? That was a Mike Tyson body blow. It took my breath because that was me having to face my truth. The only reason why I was here is because I prioritized somebody else. And I had to go back and sit in my cell with that heaviness on my chest. But I promised myself that day, when I leave her, I have to go get help. There was this reconciliation that although I wasn't the direct reason for being in that police station that day, my decisions took me to the place that allowed me to be in that police station that day. And I had to earn that. Up until that point, I probably would have blamed everybody else. It wasn't my fault. I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. But hearing my mom say to me, why do you love everybody else more than you love yourself? I couldn't run from that fact. I was released without any charges. But that day, I found myself a life coach. And I started working with a woman who was a straight shooter. You know, I've worked with therapists and psychologists for years after my suicide attempt. But I never had someone tell me the truth. She told me that the reason my life looked the way that it did is because I was a victim. I had become so comfortable with my story of being a victim that I gave my power away. I would say that I'm this independent woman. I've survived everything that's been thrown at me. But here I was giving away my power by allowing myself to believe that I was a victim. I wasn't. Learning that victimhood keeps us stuck. Learning that victimhood gives away our power shifted everything for me. I learned as a result of working with that coach that if I didn't change the way that I looked at the world, my world would never change. And by taking ownership of my actions and not allowing them to place me in victimhood, allowed me to move past the trauma that I experienced. I had never moved past it, but I didn't see it until I was told the truth. And then it was this task of having to, again, define who I was without the trauma. I had to learn how to trust the decisions that I made. I had to learn how to accept every bit of the flaws that I had. And I had to learn how to show up as me, unapologetically. Because if I didn't, I would stay stuck. I decided shortly after working with this coach to get up and leave Bermuda. Because one of the things that I recognized was I cannot grow beyond the environment that kept me in trauma for so long. I had a constant reminder of the mistakes that I had made while I was in Bermuda. I was surrounded by the people that created toxicity in my life. So I moved to England, and I've been in England now for 11 years. And while I've been here, it gave me the opportunity to really just press reset. Nobody knows who I am. I got to define who I was, the woman that I wanted to be, the impact that I wanted to make on the world. When I was growing up, I was this person that nobody really liked. I was too much for everybody. But as I got to know, like, and trust and accept myself, I learned that my too muchness was there for a reason. I learned that all of the trauma and drama that I have been through was there for a reason. This woman that was too much now has a voice. This person who has bulldozed her way through adversity after adversity is now bulldozing her way to success. I learned about the Maslow's pyramid, right? And how self-actualization is like the pinnacle of life. What I realized that for me, my self-actualization was earning who I was and being willing to give back and to help and to show people that they don't have to stay stuck. To show people that survival is not the final destination. It's a pit stop while you learn how to know, like, and trust yourself enough to start thriving. Allow your test to become a testimony. Allow your struggle to become a song of victory. And don't stay a survivor. Start thriving. It's like throwing a middle finger up to your trauma. And that's what we're here to do.